They've got access to more resources, but the one thing they don't really have access to is heart. And this is the thing that gets missed in very entrepreneurial endeavors that are driven so much by local activity. Matt, you mentioned before how generous you've noticed the roofing industry is. The one thing you don't notice in private equity-owned companies is that same level of generosity. You notice the generosity in the senior leaders that have exited, and they take a portion of that money and are very generous with it. But you don't notice the generosity in the private equity ownership companies that you see so broadly in everything else. What happens as a result of that is communities see it. And so I do think that when you look at the independent roofing contractors who are competing with private equity, yes, they've got more resources, but they often bring those resources, as I said, with less heart. And it's that human connection that still matters to the sales process, the customer service process, and particularly in commercial, industrial, low-slope roofing, institutional roofing.
Hey there, and welcome to Under the Roof, the official podcast of Baker Roofing Company. I'm Todd Kavanaugh.
And I'm Matt Elban, and we're here to connect the dots between field and office, leadership and crew, values and action.
In each episode, we dive into the stories, lessons, and updates that matter to our team.
From safety and career growth to company milestones and good old-fashioned storytelling, it's all about living out what makes Baker, Baker. Let's get into it.
Hey there, and welcome back to Under the Roof.
I'm Matt Elban.
And I'm Todd Kavanaugh. And today we're sitting down with someone who's had one of the most unique career paths in our industry, Mr. Reid Ribble.
Reid's journey is pretty remarkable. He spent 30 years running his family roofing business in Wisconsin, then served 3 terms in Congress representing Wisconsin's 8th district, and then became CEO of the National Roofing Contractor Association, where he led some of the most ambitious professionalization initiatives our industry has ever seen.
His journey, it gives him a perspective very few people in our industry have. He's seen it from the contractor's desk, from Capitol Hill, from the association boardroom, and now from corporate boards. We're going to talk to him about what he learned in each of these roles, his vision for elevating roofing as a profession, and where he sees the industry headed.
Reid, welcome to Under the Roof. We really appreciate you being here. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hey, it's good to be with you guys.
It's funny, we've had several meetings, and when I think it started last year, Roofing Contractor Magazine added a column on the far right-hand side at the top 10 that wasn't there before. And that column is essentially private equity. And of the top 10, there's only a handful now that the column is not yet. The mark on that is not yes. And I know every competitor is valuable out there, and there's a lot of companies that are PE aligned that are doing great work. But for those contractors like Baker who've chosen to remain independent or are looking at that as an option, whether through employee ownership or other structures, what's your advice to them in competing against PE-backed platforms that maybe have access to more resources than an independent contractor does?
They've got access to more resources, but the one thing they don't really have access to is heart. And this is the thing that gets missed in very entrepreneurial endeavors that are driven so much by local activity. Matt, you mentioned before how generous you've noticed the roofing industry is. The one thing you don't notice in private equity-owned companies is that same level of generosity. You notice the generosity in the senior leaders that have exited, and they take a portion of that money and are very generous with it. But you don't notice the generosity in the private equity ownership companies that you see so broadly in everything else. What happens as a result of that is communities see it. And so I do think that when you look at the independent roofing contractors who are competing with private equity, yes, they've got more resources, but they often bring those resources, as I said, with less heart. And it's that human connection that still matters to the sales process, the customer service process, and particularly in commercial, industrial, low-slope roofing, institutional roofing, where you're building customers for the long haul, customers that don't just need a roof today and it's done, but they've got budgets of $250,000 or $500,000 a year, every single year. Those are the customers that you're looking for, that local hospital, that local university, that local manufacturing plant that's expanding. And by getting in there and offering excellent service and roof asset management programs and things like that. And you're also seeing these same people at your kids' concerts in high school or at a local football game or whatever. You're building these relationships up in a different way that often doesn't happen in an equity-owned company.
And that's great insight there. Switching gears again. So you served in Congress from 2011 to 2017. When you first got to Washington, what was the bigger shock? How different it was from what you expected, or realizing that running a roofing company was actually better preparation than you thought?
I think initially I felt completely lost. I had a really good staff. I hired professional staff. I did something that most freshman members didn't do when they come in, is I waited to hire staff until I had gone through orientation and got my committee assignments. Almost everybody else that was elected, I came into that wave year in 2010 where there were like 70 new members. They were all former state legislators. They were state senators or state assemblymen, or they were governors or mayors. And they had they had a circle of people that they brought with them. And sadly, those people also didn't know how this bigger oddball organization of the House of Representatives actually worked. I waited until I got my committee assignments and I said, I need to go find experts. I was on the Agriculture Committee and the Transportation Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, and things like that. I better Budget Committee. I want to go hire experts in those areas that the House Representatives had given me oversight for so that I would be the most prepared I could be. I struggled a bit in learning the glossary, quite honestly there. It probably took me 5 or 6 months to just figure out what all the words. You'd go down, you'd have a motion made on the floor to recommit. Now, I don't know what the heck is a motion to recommit. I don't have any idea what that is. And basically a motion to recommit is a motion to send that legislation back to the committee where you say, you guys aren't prepared enough for this. We're sending it back to the committee and redo it. And if you're in the majority, you always vote no on any motion to recommit. If you're in the minority, you always vote yes. It's just all propaganda. And it takes a while for you to learn kind of the nonsense of it all and then what's real and what's not real. But that takes some time, and having professional staff that really knows the ins and outs of that was helpful. But I did find that my business experience, here's where it really helped, was putting together a team of workers there and knowing how to manage people in a way that they wanted to stay with you. My chief of staff was with me the entire 6 years. My deputy chief of staff was with me the whole time. And so a lot of the people that I hired in those earliest days, because I hired professionals, I kept my staff small so I could pay better. I hired people that were a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, paid them a little bit better, and then I treated them right. And as a result of that, my staff was among the most efficient of the 435 in the House of Representatives, both in D.C. and in Wisconsin.
You said the word nonsense, and it just made me think 6 years in Congress and 30 years in roofing. Did you ever find yourself in committee meeting thinking, this is exactly like trying to coordinate a tear-off in the middle of a rainstorm?
Yeah, I did. Interestingly enough, I would often think back to my days in the roofing work and find parallels there that were there. But for me, most of those parallels showed up in the communication side, where you would say, this is the only place on earth that people would talk this way. In the real world, nobody talks this way about anybody else. And so there's a lot of vitriolic and name calling and people acting like 6-year-olds and being rewarded for it. And then I think back, if that person worked for me in my roofing company, they would have lasted about an hour or two and I would have fired them. And yet in Congress, they get rewarded for being childish. And just look what's going on right now. You know, the government shuts down. You still have to pay your taxes. Do you think under any circumstance that the federal government's going to come back and say, hey, you know what? We shut the government down for 5% of the year, so we're going to give every American a 5% rebate back on the taxes they paid because they didn't get the services they deserved. It's that kind of ridiculous nonsense that they can't chew gum and walk at the same time. And so I did look at how committed a lot of those people were, but also how others weren't committed at all. They were there for the fame or the title, or they were just building something for their legacy, but not really serious at doing the work.
Talking a little bit about legacy, one of the things that I read is one of your signature legislations was the Bridge to Sustainable Infrastructure Act, which addressed a $16 billion annual highway trust fund shortfall. Why was infrastructure for you and infrastructure funding so personal to you as a former contractor?
Well, I spent my life in construction, right? And when you look at how we do infrastructure in the country and how roads are built, how buildings are built and maintained, we think in terms of infrastructure as roads and bridges, but it's also seaports, it's federal buildings like federal courthouses in your state. It's all kinds of federal vertical construction, including all the buildings that DOD owns. And the way that the trust fund was funded was just totally insufficient. And so we would authorize $100 billion of spending when our taxation was only covering a third of that. For example, I took the entire highway trust fund, put it all in a spreadsheet and showed all the areas where money was coming in, right down to the penny. And then I showed all the spending that money was going out, and the shortfall was at the bottom of this big spreadsheet. And I had all kinds of sensitivities that I could change to try to get that to zero on the bottom rather than a negative 70 billion. And I came up with like 15 or 16 ways of funding the Highway Trust Fund so that we were actually paying for what we were buying. And it was my contention. I remember making a speech on the floor of the House, and I said something to the extent, if something is worth buying, it is worth paying for. Novel concept, right? Because they were willing to buy stuff, but what they wanted was your children or your grandchildren to pay for it. The problem is that they're going to have roads to pay for when they grow up. So they shouldn't be paying for their roads and our roads. And so I just wanted us to pay for, if we're going to spend $100 billion, then we should prop up the trust fund to be at $100 billion, not at 32 or 33 billion, because that net 70 billion compounds interest all along. And today, the federal government is paying more money in interest than they are for national defense. I was passionate about construction because I knew it. It's absolutely needed. I mean, you guys would make more money if your crews were not sitting in a traffic jam someplace. And simple things were like, why don't we take a 3-lane highway, make it 4 lanes, and on the 2 inside lanes, build that highway with 8 inches of concrete, but the 2 outside lanes build with 12 inches of concrete. Limit big trucks, the semi-trucks and the trucks at 80,000 pounds to those 2 outside lanes. Now when they want to pass, one truck going 65.5 miles an hour, trying to pass a guy going 65, and you got 300 cars backed up behind them. You've got all the trucks on that 2 lanes, and you've separated light duty from heavy duty vehicles. And now cars can drive at a faster pace and do it safer. And you can actually build that highway for as cheap as a 6-lane highway with 12 inches of concrete on the whole thing. And there's just simple things like that. It's like you just can't get anybody to be imaginative and have enough ideation in their life to try to think through how do you solve these problems.
So you developed Roofing Day in D.C. during your NRCA tenure, targeting really representatives from all 50 states. And one of the things you said was the roofing industry, for the most part in Washington, D.C., is virtually invisible. Did your congressional experience teach you something about visibility and advocacy that the industry was missing?
I was the only roofing contractor in Congress. As a matter of fact, I think I'm the only roofing contractor ever elected to Congress. And you know how many roofing contractors came to see me in the 6 years I was sitting in my office? 0. Not a one. You think the one guy they'd want to come and see is me. And so when I say that they were invisible beyond the scope of what professional lobbyists could do, either for the manufacturers or for the NRCA. Sure, the NRCA staff would come and talk to me about things, but at the end of the day, we relied solely on 1 or 2 people. And then I was able, because I was sitting in a congressional chair, I was able to watch how other industries did it. How did they do advocacy? And then when I went to NRCA, I said, we need to completely pivot on how we're going to do advocacy. And I can tell you my Washington, D.C. staff wasn't exactly thrilled because that came down as an edict rather than me bringing people involved in it. But I didn't want to hear all the reasons why we couldn't. Instead, I just said, we're going to go ahead and do this, and we're going to put the roofing industry right in the faces of every congressional district out there. And in fact, that's been one of the most successful events. And now that fly-in is in the top 5 fly-ins in the country. And every office in the country has a connection to roofing contractors back in their home congressional district.
That's pretty cool.
And so we're finally being heard. And there's been some big wins on that, both in the One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed this year back in 2017. We're really proud to influence a lot of the tax policies that saved every subchapter S company literally hundreds of billions of dollars of taxes that could be reinvested back into their companies, all because of the work that we were doing.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, right? We want to invest in the people that we work with, and as a company, we want to invest in our company. And so having that extra to do that is ideal.
Yeah, all you need to do is look at your balance sheet and look at that number that's under the depreciation line. That's where those tax dollars get reinvested back in with new trucks, new cranes, new equipment, new modernization that you otherwise might not do if you were just sending it down into the money pit that's Washington, D.C.
May 2024 Roofing Road Trips podcast. You had another quote that was good and kind of we noticed and thought of here. So the good news is we're in way better shape now than we were a decade ago. And it's by a mile. And you were talking regarding workforce challenges, but the data is still kind of tough. 35,000 workers retiring annually from roofing. That's a lot. We continue to need thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of additional construction workers. So what makes you optimistic that we will be able to achieve those variances?
Well, we finally, to the degree that you're able to at a national association like NRCA, finally able to focus the industry's attention on it, and not in a granular way, not just by getting Baker Roofing focused on it, but getting an entire industry focused on it, getting the manufacturers focused on it, getting the distribution people focused on it, getting the contractors focused on it, getting the consultants focused on it. We've got the entire industry focused on a single problem. And this problem is really in our faces today with all the ICE activity going on, because the roofing industry is very dependent on immigrant workforce. It's never been more important to have this up front on everybody's radar. And we have to change how we think, what we do. That's why I was so passionate about pro certification. And I wish it had caught fire. Can't force contractors to do what's in their best interest unless they believe it's in their best interest. When we interviewed high school students, certification was one of the things that they sought. And so we built the professional pathway for people to be professionally certified with third-party authentication, not just a manufacturer saying, yeah, you've got it. And not that I poo-poo that, but I'm just saying someone that can actually demonstrate that the training they've had actually resulted in a skill is pretty important. And they're very proud when they get it. There's a whole host of initiatives that NRCA and the Roofing Alliance undertook to focus on this issue. And baby steps taken one right after another begin and start to become miles. And now you're 1,000 miles down the road. And so I remember a speech I gave to IRE, and I said, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And so the idea was the sooner you get started on a project, the sooner 20 years down the road comes and it matures. And these things take time.
Yeah, and that's true for really a lot of things in business, right? Making the decision and moving forward with it.
It's true for a lot of things in life, too.
When you told that story earlier about the gentleman you were meeting with, the owner of that roofing company, and he identified himself as being in construction, I had a pang of guilt because I've been guilty of that before. I've said, oh, I'm in construction. And, my past a little bit, I've been here at Baker for over 20 years now. And sometimes I feel a little bit like an imposter because I'm a marketer. I'm not actually doing some of the hard work, though there are hard days, even as a marketer. But my previous life, I was with an investment bank for 4 or 5 years and got an internship in school and then got into their program and was there for 4 or 5 years and was really that was the only other job that I held. But when I moved up to North Carolina with my wife and I got an offer from a roofing company, felt like I was, in my mind, I can say this now and it's not true, but I felt like a step down. And I almost didn't take it because it was roofing. And I think a lot of young people, professionals, tradespeople, they don't really think about all of the different roles that reside in our industry as well. And, our industry continues to face persistent workforce shortages that contractors deal with every day. And from your congressional experience, what did you learn about the complexity of workforce policy and attracting various different types of talent?
So I think the thing that I focused on the most when I was in Congress, to be more specific, knowing full well that the roofing industry was drawing a larger and continually larger immigrant workforce, was to improve the pathway for people to come here legally. And so, because every wave of legal immigration in the United States has resulted in improved and growing wages, every wave of illegal activity has pushed wages down. So how do we take this desire of millions of people around the globe who want to have a slice of the American dream? How do we take that desire and make a pathway that is legal for them that seems rational? And the reason we have so many undocumented workers in the country is because the legal mechanism appears to them, whether they're in Honduras or Guatemala or whether they're in the Philippines, it appears to them as being irrational. So then they do something that appears less irrational, and they take their passport, fly to Las Vegas on vacation, and never go home. If the irrational appears rational, that's what happened. And so for me, it was really talking about and trying to persuade my colleagues that we don't have an immigration crisis in the country and that we need to fix the brokenness of the immigration program. But what I discovered was nobody wants to fix it because they would rather be able to campaign on the brokenness. And so I was continually frustrated, and I would pivot to, well, if we're going to fund this much money in Pell Grants for someone to get a 4-year degree where there's not as much demand for jobs, but not fund someone going into a trade school, well, that doesn't make any sense to me either. So how do we increase funding for students that want to go into a technical school or a trade school and help that pathway? Because they only have to go 2 years and then they're a taxpayer. And they have 1/10 of the debt of a 4-year bachelor's degree. And so I worked on a lot of those types of things. And I would often tell people, you're going to know you've got an immigration crisis in the country when nobody wants to come here, not when too many people do. Nobody's breaking into Russia. Nobody's breaking into China or North Korea, for crying out loud. There's no big North Korean dream. Let's be realistic about this. Stop demonizing a whole class of people that just want to have a better life in the same way that your great-great-grandparents did.
You're not wrong. February 2025, you made a speech at the IRE keynote titled, "Is the American Dream Dead?" And you challenged the notion that opportunity is disappearing. You said every generation lives their own version of the American dream. I can agree. The American dream has changed, right? For different groups of people and different, whether it's immigration or whatever, that American dream has changed. So how does that philosophy apply to really getting young people into the roofing career today?
It does not take a boatload of wealth to get into the roofing business. I mean, there's a tremendous opportunity for someone who comes in and works for Baker Roofing for 5 or 6 years, learns a trade at your expense while you making some money off of them, and then they go off and start their own company. I would be willing to bet if Baker Roofing is like my roofing company was, you've probably started, without even knowing it or being intentional about it, 50 other roofing companies. Some that you're competing with today, some that are in different parts of the country. Because there's not a lot of obstacles to getting in it. You just need to know it. And the opportunity to move up really, really fast in the roofing industry is right there. And so you can move quickly from being a tradesman to being a foreman, to being a project manager, to being sales and marketing, to being a CEO or COO of a roofing company in a decade amount of time. And there's hardly any other industry that you can do that in. And it's the untold story of opportunity and the speed at which the American dream can be realized that we don't communicate well enough inside of our industry to young people who are thinking and maybe are more entrepreneurial minded. And we have to tell our stories in a better, more compelling manner. And once we get there, people will begin to realize, boy, this is a pretty good path to the American dream. And I know that when I'm talking to a large group, especially at IRE, there's a large number of millionaires in that audience listening to me, and then an equally sized number of people listening, wanting to be. And so part of my role when I am invited to speak there is to try to encourage people on what could be. Just put your mind to it. What could happen? I would have never guessed when I started in the roofing business at age 20 that my career would have taken the path it took.
I've gotten to ask you a few questions now with quotes, and I'm a big fan of quotes. I think they serve an awesome purpose. So at IRE 2022, you gave a standing ovation quote. We can never expect young people to be drawn to our industry or respect what we do until we respect what we do. We respect what we do, right? So at Baker, our founding principle from 1915 has always been, we shall do good work at a profit if we can, but always good work. That's our company way of expressing that respect. But beyond mottos and mission statements, what does respecting what we do actually look like in practice?
First of all, it's showing up to work on time, being committed to doing the best possible work you can, making sure that the customer is always treated at the highest possible standard so that when you go home at night, you can feel really good about what you did. But it's also working safely. There's nothing more tragic than having someone get injured on a job or God forbid, having a fatality on a roofing crew. That can devastate a company's emotion and well-being. And so I think respect begins with those types of ideas. We're going to treat the customer best, and then making sure that as a company owner, you're rewarding people correctly when they do those things. And I think a lot of times people say, well, I just can't retain my workers. In my personal experience, when a company struggles retaining workers, they have a tendency to blame the worker, but people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. And so how do you as a boss challenge yourself to be the best possible employer that you can be? How do you express respect to the people that are working down your chain of command? And receiving respect starts by showing respect. And I will tell you, we have a tendency to want people to be interested in what we're doing. And so we try to be as interesting as possible. And to me, I think one of the biggest strengths you can possibly have is instead of this desire to be interesting, have a desire to be interested in instead. And if you're interested in people, if you're interested in hearing their stories, before you need to feel some compulsion to tell yours, what you'll find is respect for you as a tendency to grow. And so when you can convince your employees to be interested in their customers' needs, interested in the things that are important to them, whether it's a residential customer or commercial customer, and delivering that, the amount of respect that comes. And Terry Dorn, who worked for me in my congressional office and then came along with me to NRCA, she compiled and collected over my 6 years in Congress. She saved every thank you letter and thank you card I ever received. And members of Congress get so much mail, sometimes 1,000 pieces of mail a day. You just get so much mail that I rarely personally read any mail. And when I left Congress, she gave me these 3-ring binders filled with all the thank you cards and thank you notes that I had gotten that I had never even seen. It was really important for me to see it because sometimes you don't feel like you're doing good work. But more importantly, I know that my kids and grandkids read all the bad stuff that people are saying about me online. And I wanted my grandchildren who would maybe only know me through the internet to have that record and that history so that they could, to the degree they could, see a different side of their grandfather. And I think that's really important in your roofing company as well, because you get all kinds of thank you cards and people are so appreciative of what you do. And those need to be shared with the workers and with your team, and they need to be shared with your customers, because those types of things get people to feel that respect that you're hoping that would kind of indwell them and in their work. There's always a story behind everybody's roofing problem that you fixed.
I love your optimism, both about work and about the industry. And I also read a quote. I love quotes. We brought a few of these up. You said, I spent way too much time and too many hours worrying about things that never happened. With that in mind, and man, that one struck me too. And I thought, gosh, what am I worrying about? What am I thinking about? And spending time on and energy that never actually came to fruition. Could you speak to us a little bit about that and maybe a lesson learned?
I had a couple employees of mine that struggled with anxiety and mental health. And I know that the roofing industry has focused quite a bit of attention the last couple of years on worker suicides, because in construction, there's an inordinate amount of suicide going on. And there's a level of anxiety that people have about things and whatever it may be that drives them. And so I began to think of my own personal life and the types of things that were stressors on it, where I would feel things of anxiety. And then I looked forward and said, well, but that never happened. I worried about it, but it never happened. And then I worried about this and it never happened. And it began to get this thought in my mind that about 90% of the stuff I worried about wasn't even real. These things never, ever happened. Now, maybe they didn't happen because I worried about them and kind of took care of things, but anxiety can be a killer of respect and joy and just happiness in life. And people want to be around people that are joyful. I often would tell people that the biggest mistakes I made in hiring was I would hire somebody for what they know, only to fire them 6 months later for who they were. So I began to hire people that had different mentality and attitude about themselves, about life. And the bulk of my interviews was trying to determine whether, is this somebody I want to put in an office 30 feet from me every single day? Is this somebody that I want to work with? And somebody that's filled with anxiety or given toward depression or lives that cup half empty lifestyle rather than a cup half full. I wanted to have those optimistic, enthusiastic people, and I surrounded myself with really good people. And I was never, ever concerned about having somebody smarter than me in the room. In fact, I preferred to be the dumbest guy in the room because I knew if I surrounded myself with really brilliant people throughout my career and my life, so I married Dina, she's so much smarter than me, is I knew that my life would be better because I'm surrounding myself with people smarter than I am. And people that always want to hire down, it's because they have to feel superior. And that robs respect from all those people.
It's really good.
So one of the industry magazine's professional roofing article about you talk about coaching varsity volleyball for 25 years while running your roofing company and getting active in the NRCA. And that one resonates with me. I'm a varsity soccer coach, and it does take some time. Roofing in general is not known for, and the construction industry is not known for having great work-life balance. And it is hard at times to balance that out. For me, I'm sure it was for you. How did you manage it? I guess, was it a conscious decision to protect that time as a coach?
It was, but I think this comes from things that my dad taught me. He taught me that you need to carve up time in such a way that you can make priorities for certain things. He said, first of all, you want to carve out time and make a priority your relationship with your spouse. He said, the second thing you want to do is you want to carve out time and make a priority for your relationship with God and for your faith. And then you want to also carve out time and make it a priority to give to your work. Your fellow colleagues at work expect you to be present when you're there. And then you need to make time to give to your community because it's your community that provides your livelihood. And so you take those 4 principles and you carve up your time, and it sounds challenging, but it's not all that challenging to make it a priority. So for example, I made it a priority to have lunch with my wife every day. We'd meet at a restaurant or I'd just go home and we would have lunch because she was a stay-at-home mom for most of her life. And I'm busy working and driving around the state of Wisconsin. And I just made it a priority to be home at lunchtime. And then I made it a priority to get involved in my church and in my community. There was that community thing that said, no, this opportunity to coach these kids is beneficial both to me and to them. And their life lessons I can help teach. I can take the gymnasium and make it a classroom for these students and teach them some life lessons, which we did. And so I was proud of my time at coaching and I enjoyed it a lot. When you give back to your community, there becomes an awareness of your company and what you do just by being present. And when I said I was going to run for Congress, most of my brothers, I got 5 of them, they all thought I'd lost my mind. And you'd think your family would be the one to be the most encouraging. They were the most discouraging. But at the end of the day, they said, nobody even knows who you are. But what I discovered was that wasn't true. When I started talking to the community and to business leaders, everybody knew me. They knew me through my church. They knew me through my community involvement, through my coaching. They knew me from things I was doing every single day and my generosity and charity. So I actually was way better known than I thought because I was giving time throughout my entire life to these things. And it wasn't at the expense of another. It was because of those things. I was healthier in my relationship with my wife because things were going good at work. I was healthier with my relationship at work because things were going good in the community and in my faith and things like that. So
I think of the word service. It comes to mind every time I think of that type of question and the answers you gave and the 4 pillars that you mentioned, right? Relationship with God and your faith is crucial. Your wife, your family, community, and then work. And those engagements, how much time we spend with each one of those, what we're doing with those, they're woven together in such a tight-knit way if it's done right. And if it's done with the attitude of service. What can I do for someone else? It's not about me. This whole conversation today is not about me or Todd or you. It's honestly about the generation that's coming up and what we can do for them so that they'll be wanting to be engaged in the roofing industry.
Yeah, with us, right? And that's how you become a whole person. And kind of having this servant mindset is really a significant part of that. My father taught me that, and I'm glad he did.
My dad and my mom were both crucial in instilling that in me as well.
And I'm thinking about it, and I think the irony is sometimes that we think as leaders, we have to deprioritize those things in our minds sometimes productive. So squeezing every moment out of the day for productivity helps make us a better leader and somebody better to look at, where the reality is probably the exact opposite. I think not only is it better for our communities and better for our families and those around us to prioritize other elements of our life that have value, family, faith, recreational activities? Not only is that good for those things, but I think that also makes us a better leader by example, because we normalize that. We make it okay for people that look to us for leadership to say, oh, it's okay for me, for those things to be important for me too. Can you speak to a little bit maybe about what that looked like in your professional life of prioritizing volleyball coaching and some of these other things and the impact it had?
I'm going to answer it this way. And my 21-year-old grandson, who's currently over in Germany in Stuttgart, he asked me a question not too long ago if I would be willing to just send him a note with the top 5 or 6 things I would like to have told myself or known when I was 20. What advice would I give him? I'm just going to read the first 5 or 6 things. The first thing I said is, no is a full sentence. And what I mean by that, you have to be able to say no to some things. And so you feel uncomfortable because everybody wants to say yes to everything. But to focus and prioritize, you have to say no. Second thing I told him is being unbothered is a skill. It's so easy to get annoyed and bothered by things, but being unbothered in life is a skill. The third thing I told him is silence is a response. Sometimes you just need to listen silently. And then the fourth one was most things that you think are urgent can wait. And then finally, the one that you mentioned earlier, Todd, is that most things you will ever worry about will never happen. Now, I gave him another 20 things, but those are the things that first came right to mind when he asked me that question. And when you talk about balanced time, it is so easy to overcommit to things because you never want to say no. But part of growing up and being mature is the ability to prioritize. And so that when my dad said, it's okay to give time to these things, he was kind of releasing me to actually begin to divide up time and say, it's okay to spend time here, but it's also okay to say no to this or to that. And it's liberating the freedom to just say, I'd love to help you, but I can't. Matt, I probably get 15 requests a week to do podcasts. In the last 2 months, this is the only one I took. I say no to that many, but this is how much respect I have for Baker Roofing.
We appreciate you, Reid. I certainly appreciate you saying yes. You've been able to drop some really great nuggets into this, and so I'm hoping that this really does serve as a catalyst to grow the roofing industry, to grow the respect for the roofing industry from an internal perspective, us respecting ourselves where it starts, right? But also from the outside. This is an important industry and one that needs some attention. So thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. I enjoyed the conversation a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much, Reid. And yeah, I really hope we hope to share this. And I took some notes while you were talking, and I was listening to those 5 things, and I think I saw Matt taking those notes, and I'm going to be emailing him right after, because those need to be pinned up to my wall. But we really appreciate it. And
you want me to take 2 minutes to share the rest of them?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we got them recorded,
there you go.
Todd. So we're good.
So, receiving respect is always greater than receiving attention. Apologies are empty without action. The best medicine is movement. You're not for everyone, and that's okay. Even if 3 million people have a dumb idea, it's still a dumb idea. Don't confuse being unwilling to being unable. Failure is more common than success. Learn from it, but don't embrace it. Personal responsibility is the ability to see your future and then walk toward it. It doesn't matter what you tell your kids, it matters what you show them. I've mentioned this one before. Instead of trying to be interesting to people, try being interested in people instead. Once you get a taste of quietness, you can finally stop chasing the noise. Don't debate what being a good person is. Demonstrate. Inspiring people is greater than impressing people. Self-awareness is a gift. Be relentlessly grateful. If my grandson could adopt those at age 21, in my view, his life will be way better than trying to figure that all out on his own.
Thank you so much for sharing those. And I look forward to everybody being able to hear this and share this conversation. So
that's it for this episode of Under the Roof. Reid, thank you again for sharing your perspective from all these different vantage points. It's been fascinating. You've had me on the edge of my seat. Contractor, congressman, CEO, board member. It's a unique journey that gives you insight most people in the industry don't have. And so we thank you for that.
And if you're listening and want to keep the conversation going, I want to share this quote again. We can never expect young people to be drawn to our industry or respect what we do until we respect what we do. Whether that's through employee ownership, professional development, or just how we talk about our work, it really starts with us.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Don't forget to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode, and please share it with your crews.
And remember, we shall do good work, at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always good work. See you next time.